The music echoed down the curved driveway before I even reached the valet. It was some overproduced remix of a pop song Carter used to blast from his bedroom speakers in high school. I remembered because I hated it then too. The lights spilling out from the event center looked like something from an awards show, gilded, excessive, and completely unnecessary. But that was my brother, or at least the version my parents insisted on projecting. I parked a block away deliberately and walked the rest of the way, heels tapping lightly against the sidewalk. I had a wrapped gift under one arm, a record player I'd tracked down from a boutique in Portland. Not the flashy kind, but the one Carter mentioned once in passing as the kind that made music feel like a memory. That's the thing about me. I remember the things no one expects. I show up when no one thinks I will, and I don't make a scene until I have to. The security guard at the front entrance had shoulders like a linebacker, and the kind of polite authority that makes you instinctively double-check your outfit. I offered a small smile and stepped forward. "Evening," I said, handing him the invitation card that had arrived, oddly without a return address. Minimalist, expensive, pointedly impersonal. He scanned the QR code and frowned. "I'm sorry, ma'am, this is a private event." I blinked. "Right, I'm Sutton Halley, Carter's sister." He looked at his clipboard, then back at me. "I'll double-check, but you're not on the list." Behind him, through the tall glass doors, I could see the party in full swing. Blue and gold banners and ice sculpture shaped like the number 26 and a velvet rope step-and-repeat wall where Layla Carter's fiancé was posing for a live stream with a ring light. Guests in cocktail dresses clinked glasses, laughing beneath hanging lanterns. This wasn't a family dinner like my mother had implied. This was a spectacle, a production, a 300-guest birthday party for my little brother, one I wasn't supposed to witness, let alone attend. The guard cleared his throat. "Again, I'm really sorry. It's a firm guest list. Only names that were pre-cleared." I exhaled slowly and nodded, stepping back. My fingers brushed the side of my coat where my phone was tucked smooth and cold. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask him to call anyone. Instead, I tapped once and held the phone to my ear. "Hi, it's Sutton. Go ahead and freeze all Halley Foundation disbursements. Yes, including the events card. Immediately." I hung up before the person on the other end could reply. From behind the glass, I watched the ripple hit. First the music hiccuped, just a skip. Then the sound cut entirely. Lights flickered as if the power source had suddenly been rerouted. Two staffers near the bar picked up phones simultaneously. Layla turned sharply toward the DJ booth, her smile frozen mid-pose. The security guard stared past me, confused. "What just happened?" he murmured. I adjusted the gift under my arm and smiled. "Looks like the party froze." I turned and walked toward the street. "You see, I'm not just Carter's sister. I'm Sutton Halley. I'm 30 years old. I run a private fintech consultancy that's quietly backed 5 Fortune 100 expansions, and I've been the financial spine of my family since I was 22. They just never mentioned it in the Christmas letters." Behind me, voices rose, confused murmurs, urgent footsteps. A woman in heels rushed outside, phone to her ear, panic sharp in her tone. I didn't slow down. They say family is everything. But when everything is built on selective memory and silent sacrifice, sometimes the only way to be seen is to stop funding the illusion. Tonight wasn't about revenge. It was about recognition. And if I had to bring a party to a standstill to remind them whose name had been underwriting their image all along, well, I figured better now than later. I reached the sidewalk, tossed the unclaimed gift into the passenger seat of my car, and slid behind the wheel. The music hadn't started back up. Good. Let them sit in silence for once. Let them feel what it's like when the support they took for granted stops showing up without warning, without fanfare. Just gone. Some things need to be cut off before they collapse. Some legacies need to be rewritten, and sometimes the person holding the pen is the one they left off the list. 4 days before the party, I stood in the back of a record shop in Capitol Hill, squinting at a handwritten label that read, "Fully restored, 1974, Dual 1229. The store owner, a guy in his 60s with yellowing knuckles and a voice like sandpaper, leaned over the counter and said, That one built like a tank, real walnut base. Still sings like it's 1974. I smiled and nodded. Wrap it. I'll take it. He blinked. You sure? It's not cheap. I pulled out my card, the one tied to a trust I'd created to support emerging cultural events in the Seattle area. A designation vague enough to include family birthdays if you squinted, I'm sure. Carter wasn't an audiophile, not really, but when we were kids, he used to crawl into my room during storms, slip under the covers and whisper, "Play the Raindrop song." He meant a Fleetwood Mac track I kept on vinyl one, with light percussion and a guitar line that sounded like water falling from leaves. We'd listen to it over and over him with his fingers in his ears, me mouthing the lyrics. He didn't know the band name, didn't know the song title, but he remembered the feeling, and that stuck with me. I hadn't seen Carter in 3 weeks. He was swamped with wedding stuff, he said. Layla was testing cake flavors, building a Pinterest board the size of a crime scene map. Every time I offered to help, he waved it off. You're busy, he told me. You've got your company, your projects, your big, important life. We're just trying to keep it simple. The thing is, he always said that. Even when I offered something small, even when I was the one footing the bill. That same day, I stopped by my parents' house to drop off the gift early. My mother was out front, pruning the hedge like it had personally offended her. She wore gardening gloves and a straw hat tilted at a perfect angle like she expected someone to take a photo for a home magazine. She looked up as I walked across the lawn. Oh, Sutton. What brings you here? I held up the gift now, neatly wrapped in navy paper with a silver bow. For Carter. I won't be able to stay long Sunday, but I wanted him to have this. She blinked. Sunday. Her voice did that thing where it lifted slightly at the end. Too light, too practiced. I tilted my head. The party. She shifted her weight, clipping a branch too short. It's not really a party, sweetheart, just a small gathering. Carter wanted it low-key, no pressure. No pressure. I repeated, feeling the bow in my hand tighten under my grip. Still seemed worth celebrating. She reached for the box. I'll make sure he gets it. Then, almost as an afterthought, oh, and don't stress yourself with planning anything. Really. Just come when you can. She turned and disappeared into the house without inviting me in. I stood there a moment longer than I should have, then walked back to my car, but something scratched at the back of my mind. 2 days earlier, I'd approved a disbursement for an event venue rental and vendor coordination fee, a 6-figure expense categorized under family initiatives. It was vague, yes, but not unusual. I'd set up the Halley Foundation to offer flexible assistance to intergenerational legacy projects, which gave my parents wide latitude to request funds. I didn't always ask for details. I wanted to trust them. But now I was starting to feel the edge of something colder. I opened the foundation dashboard on my phone while parked, checked the invoice history. There it was, Fairmont Event Hall, catering, Leuven time, guest management software, live stream package. This wasn't a small gathering. I scrolled further. Florals by Vine and Verse, custom signage, champagne towers, everything high-end, no corners cut, no budget spared, and not a single mention of me, either as a guest or the one footing the damn bill. That night, I called my dad. He picked up on the third ring. Pumpkin! Everything good, Pumpkin. A name I hadn't heard since college, usually reserved for when he needed something. I played along. Just wondering, are you all set for Sunday? He paused. Sunday Carter's birthday. Oh yes, of course. Nothing big, just a few folks from the neighborhood. Carter's friends. You know how it is. I didn't, and that was the problem. I can swing by after my board meeting. A longer pause. Sure. You know what? Don't worry about it. Just relax. We'll send pictures. Carter understands. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I simply said, okay, and hung up. By then, I knew. They didn't want me there, not because of some petty fight, not because I'd failed them, but because I made them uncomfortable. because I'd outgrown the space they put me in, and now they were throwing a luxury birthday bash on my dollar and writing me out of the story like I was a footnote in someone else's highlight reel. The next morning, I rewrote the permissions on the event card tied to the foundation. I told myself it was just precaution, but deep down, I knew I was drawing a line, and sooner or later, someone was going to trip over it. When I was 22, I used my first bonus check to pay off my parents' medical debt. It wasn't some grand gesture. It was quiet, almost bureaucratic. A wire transfer, a few scanned documents, a relieved thank you text from my father that read more like a business receipt than parental gratitude. We're lucky to have a daughter who knows her numbers. That was his way of saying he appreciated it. Or maybe that I'd done what was expected. They didn't ask for help, not directly. But they made the need visible, left bills out on the counter when I visited, muttered vague comments about the system and bad timing and not wanting to burden anyone. I'd grown up watching my parents perform pride while quietly panicking beneath it, so I stepped in. I'd always stepped in. A year later, when their mortgage application was denied credit rating too low, debts too recent no cosigner, I rerouted a portion of my restricted stock payout and quietly purchased a 3-bedroom colonial in their name. Just until you're back on your feet, I told them. They nodded like it was a gift, but within months, it became a given. There was no conversation about repayment, no acknowledgement on holidays or birthdays. It simply became the house, their clean slate. I'd become a silent investor in the version of our family they wanted to preserve. And then there was Carter. When he turned 25, he came to me with a pitch deck and a caffeine high. It's a niche home goods concept, he said, waving his tablet like it held gold. Curated interiors, organic, authentic, we'd call it Nestwell. I smiled, nodded, asked the polite questions. Then I quietly wrote him a check large enough to cover his first 6 months of rent inventory and staffing. I even put him in touch with a developer friend who built him a custom e-commerce site for half the usual rate. He ran it for a year and a half. The site never broke even. When he shut it down, he framed it as a strategic pivot, said he'd learned a lot, and maybe next time he'd look at subscription models. My parents called him resilient. My father toasted him at Thanksgiving to Carter the Dreamer. We need more of those in this world. They raised their glasses. I raised mine too quietly to my mouth and said nothing. No one toasted the funding, or the fallback plan, or the big sister who made that dream possible. They never did. In our family, Carter was the legacy, the second chance, the name carrier. I was the practical one. I balanced books, I fixed messes, I covered the gaps between what we had and what they pretended we had. I was their margin of error. Growing up, we were close in that way siblings are when life hasn't yet trained them into hierarchy. Carter was messy and impulsive and magnetic, the kind of child adults described as full of life. I was quieter. I read manuals for fun. I liked numbers patterns and things that had structure. My mother used to joke, you came out organized. He came out swinging. And yet, when we posed for family photos, it was always Carter in the center, held between two beaming parents, while I stood to the side, a shoulder caught at the edge of the frame, present but peripheral, visible but uninvited. I wasn't bitter about it then, not really. I thought I was just different. I thought being needed meant being seen, but what I didn't realize, what took me years to fully name, was that I had become a kind of family infrastructure, the scaffolding. And no one thanks the scaffolding when the building gets photographed. It started to shift after my father's health scare. He'd had a minor heart incident, nothing fatal, but enough to require hospital stays and follow-ups. My mother grew anxious, started talking about retirement dreams and downsizing to something manageable. I offered to help just to review numbers, maybe suggest options. Within a week, I'd found them a better insurance policy, paid off their old balance, and covered the cost of an upgraded plan. "Don't tell your brother," my mother whispered. "He's got enough on his plate." At the time, it felt like discretion. Now, I see it differently. Keeping Carter in the dark about what I did was a choice. Repeating that choice over and over, year after year, was a pattern. They didn't want to disrupt the narrative. Carter was the one who soared. I was the net they never admitted existed. And yet, when I tried to talk about boundaries just once, my mother sighed and said, "You're always so transactional, Sutton. Not everything is about money." As if the insulation I'd wrapped around our lives didn't come with dollar signs and consequences. As if love in this house hadn't always been measured in silence and sacrifice. So when I stood outside that ballroom and the security guard told me I wasn't on the list, it wasn't the first time I'd been excluded. It was just the first time someone had said it out loud, and it was the first time I'd decided to say something back. There's a certain tone people use when they're asking for money without saying the word money. You learn to recognize it. It shows up in texts that start with, "Hey, quick thing," or emails labeled, "Favor no rush." It's the verbal shrug that comes right before a quiet reach into your wallet. I'd been collecting those messages for years. At first I saved them because they felt important, like artifacts of trust. Later I kept them because I started to feel crazy, like maybe I'd imagined just how much they'd asked of me. But there it all was, in a folder called Family Requests. I scrolled through the thread one evening, fingers slow, mouth dry. "Could you co-sign this?" That was from Carter 2 years ago. Attached was a blurry screenshot of a loan application with my name already typed into the guarantor field, just a small emergency. That one came from my mom during a family vacation I didn't attend. The emergency was a last-minute upgrade to a hotel suite so she wouldn't risk triggering your father's back. I'd paid for 4 nights at a 5-star hotel on the Amalfi Coast and never saw a single photo. They said the internet was spotty. This is for the family. That one came from my dad after asking for funds to host a legacy dinner for Carter's engagement. I wasn't invited. The photos on social media showed a garden strung with lanterns and a long table dripping with roses. I saw my last name on the menu's gold-foiled header. I did not see myself. At some point, I stopped asking for explanations. I just made transfers, adjusted accounts, updated authorizations. I kept a spreadsheet then, a dashboard. The Halley Foundation became the soft cushion beneath every bounce. It was designed to support multi-generational family development language I'd drafted carefully back when I believed in win-win structures. I'd even created tiered approval workflows, but over time those protections eroded. The urgency was always now. And they knew how to sound helpless. A few days after the party, I sat at my kitchen counter with a mug of cold tea and opened the financial back end. I wasn't angry, not yet, but I was curious in that deep bone-level way you get when something keeps tugging at your edges and you finally stop ignoring it. The numbers didn't lie. They never do. In the last fiscal year alone, I'd approved more than $96,000 in disbursements tied to family events, health coverage gaps, and intergenerational legacy planning. Most of them came from accounts linked to my parents or Carter. The transactions ranged from $340 to over $12,000, a new HVAC system, legal fees for estate reorganization, a speaking coach for Carter's TEDx pitch that never happened. It added up, but it didn't add up. I clicked through the receipts. Some looked legitimate, others not so much. One invoice labeled education services turned out to be a wellness retreat in Sedona. Another marked career transition coaching was a multi-session branding package with a luxury content consultant. I remembered the photos Layla posted of Carter in a white linen shirt standing on a cliff. The caption said, "Building the legacy we believe in." I wasn't tagged. They always knew how to wrap a favor in mission language. My father once said, "You're like the Foundation Sutton. People don't see you, but you hold everything up." He meant it as a compliment. Back then, I took it as one, but now it echoed like a eulogy. I clicked through old photo albums online, family reunions, vacations parties I hadn't attended or hadn't been photographed at. Sometimes I was present but cropped out. Other times I wasn't there at all. In captions, I was a ghost. So grateful to the people who made this possible. I scrolled down, heart thudding. No mention. Not even a Sutton. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. This wasn't about one party. It wasn't even about the money. It was about the pattern, the way I'd been trained quietly, systematically to carry the weight and vanish before the photos were taken. I was the safety net they pretended didn't exist. I pulled up the event invoice from the party Fairmont Ballroom, $38, $400. Flowers from Vine and Verse, $6,750. Audio visual package, $4, $200. Custom neon signage, Carter built different. I stared at that line longer than I should have. They built a whole story on top of me and called it Legacy. I clicked export on the ledger. Then I started drafting a new rule. No future disbursements without a written request, a signed agreement, and a meeting with me in person. If they wanted money, they'd have to look me in the eye first because I wasn't the foundation anymore. I was the one holding the switch. It started with a notification I almost didn't open. I wasn't following Layla on any platform intentionally, but the algorithm had other plans. A video tagged with one of my holding company names surfaced while I was reviewing quarterly forecasts. The thumbnail showed Layla in a gold cocktail dress holding a champagne flute surrounded by floating balloons. Her caption read, "Carter's 26th was a dream." Huge thanks to our partners, Vireo Legacy and Blue House Capital for making it magical. Sponsored on our family values. I stared at it for a full 5 seconds before clicking. The video began with her signature greeting, "Hey, my lovelies. This one's for all the girlies who love a luxury vibe but on a mission-driven budget." Her voice was bubbly, her makeup flawless, her delivery polished to the point of scripted. We celebrated Carter's birthday in style thanks to our incredible friends at Vireo Legacy Fund. This is a family-run group that supports generational wealth and cultural milestones. Obsessed with them. My chest tightened. Vireo Legacy wasn't just some random fund. It was mine. A private LLC I'd formed 2 years ago to discreetly funnel philanthropic investments into women-led startups and transitional housing programs. It wasn't public-facing. It didn't even have a website. I used it when I wanted to move capital quietly. No press, no ego, no credit. And here was Layla hashtagging it next to party decor and her dress vendor. I scrubbed through the video, noting the angle of the camera just wide enough to catch the Carter 26 neon sign and the logo projection on the wall. My logo? A stylized fig leaf I'd designed myself. Subtle enough not to scream money, but intentional. In the right circles, people would know. Layla was counting on that. I opened my internal database and ran a permissions check. No authorized sponsorships, no brand collaborations, no PR releases, nothing. The post wasn't a mistake, it was deliberate. She'd appropriated my company's identity to boost her own. Worse, I had proof it wasn't an isolated slip. On Carter's LinkedIn page, I found a post from 2 months earlier, excited to announce a strategic collaboration with Halley Consulting to support our next venture. Honored to work alongside such vision. Attached was a photo of him shaking hands with a man I didn't recognize, an investor maybe. My name was watermarked in the background of the graphic in a font we never used. I dug deeper. A pitch deck surfaced in a shared drive meant for a boutique investment group I'd spoken with last spring. I never submitted the final version, but Carter had taken the template, tweaked the colors, and inserted himself as a co-founder. The closing slide featured my bio, my headshot, and a bullet point that read, "Backed by multi-million-dollar fintech architect Sutton Halley." No footnote, no asterisk, no approval. It wasn't just sloppy, it was calculated. He'd used my face, my record, my professional capital, and never even told me. I scrolled through old texts, trying to find anything resembling a conversation. All I saw were half efforts. Was wondering if you'd ever want to collaborate again, thinking about doing something in the impact space. Would love to get your feedback on a deck I'm working on, but he never followed up. Never sent the actual file. Just enough to create a thread, a breadcrumb trail for plausible deniability. It hit me harder than I expected. Not because I didn't see it coming, but because of how familiar it all felt. This was the same boy who used to borrow my school supplies and break the pens, who used to tell his friends he built the treehouse I stayed up all night designing. The same brother who once got praised for a science fair project that had been 70% my work and had shrugged when I confronted him with, "Well, you're better at that stuff anyway." And now he was 30 pages deep into pretending we were partners. I closed the laptop and sat still. The air in my apartment felt suddenly thin. Being excluded from a party was one thing. Being erased from your own work, that was different. This wasn't just about money, it was about identity, reputation, ownership. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was numb, because it was one thing to be forgotten. It was another to be rebranded without your consent. The knock came just after 7. I opened the door to find my neighbor Hannah holding 2 bowls of curry and a bottle of wine. She was wearing fuzzy socks and looked at me the way only someone who's known you through a breakup and a startup can. "You looked like someone who shouldn't be alone tonight," she said simply. We ate on the floor, back against the couch, the wine warm and the food better than I deserved to taste that night. I didn't tell her everything, just enough. When I got to the part about the LinkedIn post, Hannah blinked slowly and said, "So he used your name, your company, and your face to make himself look legit and then uninvited you from the party you paid for?" I nodded. She leaned back. "Damn, that's not family. That's branding theft." I laughed because it was either that or scream, and at that moment I realized something that shifted the air. I wasn't going to fix this. I was going to expose it. It took me 3 tries to dial the number. My hand wasn't shaking, but something deeper was a part of me I hadn't touched in years. The part that remembered family, not as obligation, but as warmth. The line rang twice before a voice dry but precise answered Meredith Halley speaking. "Aunt Meredith, it's Sutton," I said. My voice came out even, which surprised me. A pause. Then Sutton. Another beat. It's been a while. She wasn't being cold. That was just her cadence, deliberate, careful. Meredith had always been the quiet orbit around the louder Halley core. My father's older sister, a tax attorney by trade. She never married, never hosted holidays, never joined the family group texts. When she did appear, usually at memorials or estate meetings, she wore slate gray suits and left early. Growing up, I'd been told she was difficult, eccentric, overly principled. But I'd also watched my grandfather glance at her, then fall silent. Respect, or something close to it. "I need to ask you something about Grandpa's will," I said. "The original one." Another pause, sharper this time. "What's going on, Sutton? I found out Carter's been using my company name without permission, and I just started connecting dots I should have looked at years ago. I'm not asking you to take sides, I just need the truth." I didn't expect her to agree, but she did. She invited me to meet her that afternoon. No delay, no questions. Just an address in Oakbrook where she kept a small office above an independent bookstore. When I arrived, she didn't waste time on small talk. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, streaked silver and pulled back tightly. She wore no makeup, just a dark navy turtleneck and flat shoes. She looked like she'd stepped out of a courtroom where no one raised their voice. "I was wondering when you'd come," she said, simply gesturing for me to sit. There was no preamble, just 2 folders on her desk, one navy blue, one manila. "I never liked what your father did," she said, opening the blue one. "But I wasn't going to start a war over it, not unless someone asked." I stayed silent. Let her talk. When your grandfather Harold drafted his will, he did so with full clarity. The estate was to be split 3 shares. 1 to me, 1 to Martin, and 1 to you, not Carter. You. Specifically. She tapped the document. "You were named as the successor trustee, executor, after me, not my dad." "No." Harold respected Martin's charisma, but he didn't trust his judgment. Said he played with people's futures like poker chips. She smiled faintly. Harold was many things, but naive wasn't one of them. I leaned forward, heart tightening. "So, what happened?" She sighed. "Your father flew to Arizona the week Harold was moved to hospice, just days before he passed. When I arrived, the paperwork had already been amended. Witnesses signed. New trust established naming Carter as the primary heir of the Halley estate." Her eyes met mine. I wasn't informed until afterward. You didn't contest it, I tried. But the timing made it complicated. Harold's health had declined. The lawyers who signed off weren't the ones we usually worked with. Your father made it seem like Harold had a change of heart, wanted to give the next generation a shot. Carter was the future of the family, apparently. Her tone soured. You, conveniently, were abroad at the time, out of reach. I closed my eyes. I remembered that trip, a 6-month fellowship in Singapore. I'd been so proud, so sure I was finally stepping into something that belonged to me alone. Meredith slid the manila folder toward me. That, she said, is a certified copy of the original will. Before the changes. It's still valid in court if you ever decide to raise a claim, especially if coercion can be proven. I didn't reach for it yet. What would happen if I did? She didn't blink. You'd become the rightful beneficiary of the estate, and Martin and Carter would have to answer for a great deal more than poor judgment. The room fell quiet. Outside, wind stirred a row of wind chimes strung along the bookstore eaves. It sounded like a warning, or maybe a blessing. Why didn't you say anything sooner, I finally asked. Because she said, folding her hands, I thought you were doing just fine. But now I see that's exactly how they counted on you staying fine. Functional. Quiet. She tilted her head. I may not show up for family brunches, but I do believe in fairness. And I don't like watching women get erased from their own legacies. I picked up the folder. The paper was heavier than I expected. It felt like a map back to something I hadn't realized I'd lost. Meredith stood. Whatever you decide, Sutton, just remember Carter inherited the spotlight. But you were supposed to inherit the house it shines on. I walked out with both folders, her words echoing. For the first time, I didn't feel like someone reclaiming stolen ground. I felt like the rightful owner walking toward her gate. The first call came at 7:12 p.m. I was halfway through reheating leftovers when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize, Fairmont Events. I let it ring out. Then another came from Vine and Verse Floral Studio. Then one from DJ Elevate. By the fourth, I paused the microwave. I didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, I opened the billing dashboard. Just as I'd suspected, the payment authorization for the event account had failed to process at 6:57 p.m. because I had turned it off. I'd rescinded every auto payment linked to the Halley family legacy card, an account I'd created and funded years ago thinking I was investing in stability. Stability looked different now. When I finally picked up the fifth call, it was from the venue manager, a woman named Darcy, whose tone balanced frantic professionalism with rising panic. Ms. Halley, I just wanted to confirm, are you still the primary on the billing file ending in 1123 because the cards declined and we've got a 4-figure outstanding tab tonight? I didn't hesitate. I am no longer responsible for that account. It's not my event. A pause. So who should we? I suggest you ask the person who's hosting. The one whose face is on the banner and who's been tagging brands all night. Silence. Then a polite, clipped, understood. I hung up. Over the next hour, the texts flooded in. Carter, 7:34 p.m. Sutton, what the hell is happening? Call me. Carter, 7:38 p.m. Did you cancel the card? People are asking questions. Carter, 7:41 p.m. This is not the time for a point. Please just fix it. Carter, 7:45 p.m. Vendors are saying they're pulling out. There's still a whole after party scheduled. What are you doing? Carter, 7:53 p.m. Sutton, mom's crying. Dad's furious. I'm begging you. Call me back. Carter, 8:02 p.m. I'm not going to survive this if you don't handle it. Please. I let them stack up like unread headlines. The desperation was new, not because Carter had never needed something before, but because for the first time I wasn't cushioning the fall. Then came the text I expected, dreaded, and welcomed all at once. It was from my mother. Mom 8. 17 p.m. You've humiliated the family. Why not what's going on? Not let's talk. Just accusation draped in pearl-clutching grief. I stared at her message for a long time, thumb hovering. I thought about the favors, the erasures, the party I was never meant to walk into. I thought about Layla's fake sponsorship, Carter's forged pitch decks, my father's smooth coercion at a hospice bedside. I typed slowly, Sutton. I just turned off the faucet. Simple, clean, true. No exclamation points, no rage, just a boundary. The one they never imagined I'd set. Later, I watched clips from the party pop up online, only fragments before they were taken down. A live stream ended abruptly as the lights dimmed mid-toast. One guest recorded the florist rolling out with unused centerpieces. A TikTok caught the DJ packing up early, muttering something about unpaid invoices. But the clip that stayed with me was one of Layla standing frozen in a hallway phone to her ear saying, "What do you mean she canceled it? She was our guarantee. That word guarantee hit like a punch. That's all I'd ever been to them. Not a sister? Not a daughter? A guarantee." The next morning, a courier envelope arrived at my door. Inside was a handwritten note from Carter. The handwriting was tight, like it had been gripped too hard. "Sutton, I don't know what's happening, but I know I messed something up. I didn't mean to hurt you. I was just trying to build something. Dad said you were fine with it, that you wanted to help. I guess I never asked you directly. Maybe I didn't want to hear the answer. I'm sorry you felt excluded. I'm sorry if we made you feel small. I was just proud and scared. Carter, I read it once, then again. There was no mention of the forged sponsorships, no admission about the will, no acknowledgement of the years he stood on the foundation of my labor without ever once offering a hand back up. But it was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever received from him. I set it on the counter, and then I did something I hadn't done in months. I booked a dinner reservation for one. The kind of place with no QR codes on the menu and soft jazz that didn't beg to be posted. I wore the dress I'd bought for that birthday party, the one I was never supposed to attend. At the table, I ordered a glass of wine and toasted to silence. It had taken a single phone call to freeze the entire party, but it took years to reach the moment where I didn't want to unfreeze it. Let the music stop. Let the lights go out. Let them learn who kept it all running by showing what happened when she finally stopped. They rang the bell at 9:14 on a Wednesday morning. No text. No call. Just the doorbell. Long, patient, like they had every right to be standing there. I opened it slowly. There they were, my father in a crisp golf pullover, his mouth already tightened into performance mode. My mother with her hair curled too neatly for an unplanned visit, her eyes wide with that signature mix of worry and righteousness. "Sutton," she said softly, as if we hadn't gone silent for 4 days. As if she hadn't just accused me of humiliating the family. "Come in," I said. I stepped aside. The living room was bright from the east-facing windows. I had already set a kettle on instinct maybe, but I didn't rush. I motioned to the couch. "Tea?" I asked, voice steady. They nodded. My mother clutched her handbag like a shield. My father scanned the room, taking stock of the curated calm. He was used to meetings, not reckonings. I placed 2 cups on the coffee table. Then I brought out the folders, 3 of them stacked with methodical weight. I didn't sit yet. I let the silence settle like steam over the tea. "I thought you might want to see this," I said, opening the top folder. Donation receipts. Over the past 7 years, I've funneled just over $620,000 into family-related expenses. Medical bills, mortgage backups, Carter's branding projects, event deposits, even Layla's business coaching, all through the Hallie Legacy Fund, all approved by me. My mother blinked fast. My father stayed still. The second folder. "Here are the contracts you signed. Power of attorney forms, trust authorizations, the ones I updated when you asked for just a signature to get the bank off our backs." Finally, I opened the last folder. And here's the original will from Grandpa. The one that named me sole successor to the Hallie estate. Not Carter. My father shifted. My mother reached for her cup but didn't drink. "I didn't ask to be your ATM," I said. "You made me one." My father leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Sutton, this isn't necessary. We came to talk, not litigate." I tilted my head. "Did I say anything about court? Family doesn't sue family." He said, a practiced frown forming. "But you do erase them," I replied. Flat. You throw parties with my money and don't invite me. You put Carter's name on legacies I paid for. You let your future daughter-in-law profit off fake sponsorships tied to my company, and you knew. You knew, didn't you?" He didn't answer. My mother finally found her voice. "We thought you didn't mind. You always seemed fine. And Carter needed the boost." "He's had a harder time with being the golden child," I interrupted. "That must be exhausting." She flinched. "That's not what I meant." "But it's what you did," I said quietly. The room filled with the soft clink of ceramic as my father set his cup down untouched. "I worked 3 jobs at 22 to cover your hospital bills, Dad. I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment with no windows to float your mortgage after the market crash. I've shown up again and again without demanding credit. And what did I get in return? You told people I was just practical. You left me off the family website. You handed the future to someone who didn't know how to hold it." He stood voice low and slow. "We didn't think you'd want that kind of spotlight." I met his gaze. "You never asked." There was a long silence. No one moved. Finally, my mother's voice cracked. "What do you want from us, Sutton?" That stopped me. Because for once, I had an answer. Nothing I said. I wanted the truth. And now I have it. I closed the folders, picked them up, and walked them to the bookshelf, sliding them beside tax guides and legacy planning manuals. They belonged there, filed factual, undeniable. When I turned back, my parents were still sitting. My father cleared his throat. "This doesn't have to get ugly." "It's not ugly," I said. "It's clear." He nodded once, jaw tight. My mother didn't look at me as she stood. I walked them to the door. Just before he stepped outside, my father turned back. "What are you going to do now?" I smiled, not warmly. "That depends on what you do when people stop mistaking silence for consent." I closed the door behind them and stood for a long moment. The hallway smelled like mint tea and old decisions. That morning, I hadn't planned on confrontation, but sometimes truth walks right through the door and you let it in, and when it finally sits across from you, all you have to do is speak back. Not shout, not accuse, just name the silence for what it was, betrayal dressed as duty. I arrived at Lorna Graves's office with a folder under one arm and a headache blooming just behind my eyes. Her receptionist waved me through without pleasantries. I think they'd come to recognize the quiet urgency I wore like a second skin. Lorna didn't waste time. "Close the door," she said, the moment I stepped in. Her desk was already covered in printouts, highlighted contracts, notarized letters, bank screenshots, and 2 glossy influencer posts blown up to 8x10 for emphasis. Layla's smirking face beamed from one of them, wrapped in a branded robe I didn't recognize until I looked closer and saw the fine print funded by Halley Financial Group. My company. My name. My reputation. Lorna tapped one of the sheets. This right here is where it goes from ethically vile to legally actionable. Carter submitted a loan package to Hanover Credit 6 months ago for $2.4 million in luxury real estate. Guess whose credit file they used to secure it? I blinked. They used mine. She nodded grimly. Full portfolio, not just the business. Your private holdings, your dividend records. Someone inside must have handed over the data because these aren't public filings. They even used an old tax return from when you listed the Halley Legacy Fund under your trust umbrella. I sat down slowly, the air suddenly thick. They forged my authorization. They mimicked it. Layla's name appears on an email chain pretending to be your executive assistant. She attached the docs to back it up, doctored obviously. My throat went dry. Lorna leaned forward, voice firm but calm. This is felony-level identity fraud. It doesn't matter if they're your brother and his fiancée. It's a federal offense. The penalties are steep, especially if there was intent to deceive a lender for gain. Which there clearly was. I stared at the pile of evidence. In the corner of one loan document, my digital signature sat crooked like a mask slightly off-center. I'd been called the backbone, the reliable one, the practical girl with the invisible wallet. But this wasn't just theft. It was calculated, It was exploitation with receipts. What are my options? I asked, though. I already knew Lorna didn't deal in hypotheticals. We can file for immediate restitution, she said. We can also issue a cease and desist, freeze their personal and business assets. Yes, even Layla's influencer accounts if they were tied to these funds. And if you choose, we can refer the case to the DA's office for formal charges. I felt the blood pulse through my wrists. And what happens if I do nothing? They'll do it again, she said flat. And next time, you might not find out until you're cleaning up damage with 6 zeros. I closed my eyes for a moment. Thought of Carter's note, his shaky attempt at remorse. The way he'd said, "Dad told me you were fine with it." I thought of Layla's live stream smile, how confident she'd looked on the balcony that night on my money in my name. I always told myself family was a reason to forgive, I said quietly. But I think it became the excuse not to confront. Lorna nodded. So, what now? I opened my folder, the one I'd brought, and slid across a document. It was a formal revocation of financial support for the Halley Family Trust. My signature was fresh, final, and clear. Send everything I said. Freeze what needs freezing, and file whatever needs filing. She gave a tight nod. I'll handle it. As I stood to leave, she added gently, Sutton, you're not the villain here. I paused at the door. No, I was the vault. The hallway outside her office was quiet. Sunlight angled in through high windows, catching the brushed steel plaque with my last name etched into too many contracts over too many years. I pressed my fingers to my temples. The first, betrayal, is emotional. The second is financial. But the third, when they become one, is forensic. And this time, I had the paper trail. Carter showed up at my office unannounced. No appointment, no warning, just his name flashing on the front desk intercom like we were still on speaking terms. I buzzed him in. Part of me wanted to hear what lie he'd rehearsed. The rest of me just wanted to see if he'd say it with a straight face. He stepped into the room like it still belonged to him. Same swagger, same cologne that smelled like a marketing executive's idea of humility. Sutton, he said, palms open like I might throw something. Can we talk? I folded the legal pad in front of me. We're already talking. He sat across from me and leaned back like he'd done nothing worse than borrow a shirt without asking. You're blowing this way out of proportion. That stopped me cold. You stole my credentials to secure a loan, I said. Then you used that money to host a party you didn't invite me to and build it through my fund. I didn't even make the guest list. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. It wasn't like that. Joy Layla, she thought it might complicate things if you were there. Why, I asked. Because I've read a contract before. He looked down. She said you'd make it weird. That you'd judge the crowd, the brand stuff. Said you make people feel less than, and you agreed. I said flatly. He didn't deny it. She said you'd be embarrassing. The word didn't just land. It lodged. Like a splinter of something old and sharp I thought I'd outgrown. Carter always knew how to cut without raising his voice. That was his trick, playing innocent while twisting the knife. I stood and walked to the cabinet behind my desk, pulled a slim manila envelope from the second drawer, laid it between us. What's this? He asked. Grandpa's original will, I said. Before Dad had it rewritten behind closed doors. Carter hesitated. That's ancient history. I didn't blink. It names me the sole heir to the estate, to the foundation, to the legacy you keep hashtagging without understanding. He slid the document open eyes, scanning the first page. He paled halfway through. You're not bluffing. I don't bluff with paper, I said. Silence stretched between us. I let it. I didn't know about the rewrite, he said quietly. Dad handled all that. I thought... I raised an eyebrow. You thought what that legacy just conveniently landed in your lap. He flinched. Look, he tried again. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was just trying to build something, make us look good, keep the Halley name strong. At the cost of mine, he looked small for the first time. Not like a golden son, not like the visionary he played on stage. Just a man caught red-handed in a room he didn't own. I leaned forward. You want legacy? I tapped the will, then let's talk inheritance fraud. His face fell. You're not going to press charges, he said, suddenly defensive. You wouldn't do that to family. Family, I echoed, standing slowly. You mean the people who took my silence as permission, the ones who used my name, my money, and then called me embarrassing. He stood too, but it was shaky. This isn't you. No, I said. It's the version you hoped I'd never become. I walked to the door and opened it. He looked like he wanted to say something else. But he didn't. Instead, Carter walked out with the will still in his hands, no longer so sure it belonged to him. And me. I finally felt like the silence had snapped, like blood might be thicker, but boundaries when drawn in ink held firmer than guilt. The letters went out on a Monday. Lorna had timed it perfectly first thing before the banks opened, before Carter or Layla could attempt damage control. Cease and desists, asset freeze requests, formal demands for restitution. The wording was surgical. Not angry, just final. By lunchtime, 3 of the 4 shared credit lines were frozen. Layla's influencer brand account went dark. The event venue filed a civil claim. Carter's name disappeared from the Halley Foundation's pending partnerships. Everything moved quickly once silence stopped shielding them. I didn't call to warn them. I didn't need to. At 3:12 p.m., my phone buzzed. Mom lit the screen. I hesitated, but answered. Her voice was already trembling. How could you do this to your own family? I stayed quiet, let the question sit with her. I don't understand, she continued, the kind of performative confusion she'd always fallen back on. Your father's been sick with stress. Carter's beside himself. Layla's sponsorships are collapsing. You raised me to clean up after people, I said gently. You just didn't expect I'd start cleaning by removing the mess. You're tearing us apart. No, I said. You tore this apart years ago. I'm just letting the pieces fall where they actually belong. She started crying. Soft at first, then louder. For a moment, I remembered being 13, sitting on the hallway floor outside their locked bedroom, hearing her cry then, too. Back then, I thought, if I got good enough grades or made dinner quietly, I could fix whatever was wrong. Now, I knew better. I'm not doing this out of revenge, I said finally. I'm doing it because you built everything on the assumption that I'd stay quiet forever. She didn't reply. I waited. Then I hung up. Later that evening, as I was making tea, I saw Aunt Meredith's name flash across my screen. A single message. You did what I never dared. That hit me harder than I expected. She'd always been the quiet one, the distant one. After the original well incident, she'd kept her distance from the family machine. I used to wonder if that was cowardice. Now I realized it was survival. I messaged back. You kept a copy. That changed everything. No reply, just a heart emoji a few hours later. But it was enough. The next morning, an unfamiliar email landed in my inbox. The subject line read, I think my daughter's doing the same thing to me. I opened it. Hi, Sutton. You don't know me, but someone forwarded me the article about your legal filings. I watched my daughter use my name to take out loans for a salon that was never really hers. Now I'm being chased by creditors, and she's planning a baby shower I'm not even invited to. I thought maybe I was the only one. But reading about you, it gave me a strange kind of hope. Would you be willing to talk, Kendra Hollis? I reread the last line. Would you be willing to talk? It wasn't just a question. It was a door. For the first time in this entire ordeal, I felt something crack through the exhaustion. Not satisfaction, not even vindication, just clarity. This wasn't only about Carter or Layla or my parents. This was about the hundreds, maybe thousands of women who'd been told their strength made them cold, that their silence was grace, that being the backbone meant never asking for credit, only giving it. I hit reply. Yes. Let's talk. I'm listening. Then I leaned back in my chair and looked out the window. My city moved below in measured rhythms, cars crawling, sunlight shifting across rooftops, a bus rumbling by. For years, I'd walked through life muted, smart, capable, invisible, always funding things, always fixing things, always watching someone else cut the ribbon or post the photo or take the credit. But now, the silence was breaking, and people were listening. The conference room was chilled to the kind of temperature that kept tempers down and minds sharp. A glass pitcher of water sat in the center of the table, untouched. My father kept glancing at it like it might help his case. My mother had dressed like she was attending a charity gala, all soft florals and trembling hands. Carter hadn't shown up. Layla had submitted a written statement for emotional reasons. Across from me sat their attorney, a well-known firm partner who specialized in family reconciliation with asset transparency. Translation makes Sutton look unreasonable while skimming off enough goodwill to avoid charges. My lawyer, Lorna, didn't flinch. She laid out our folders one by one like placing tiles on a mosaic. I didn't speak for the first 20 minutes. Didn't need to. I'd already spoken with spreadsheet statements and signatures. Their lawyer began with tone. "Our clients are heartbroken," she said, voice full of breathy sorrow. "This has never been about money. It's about misunderstanding. About a daughter who's perhaps felt overlooked and has chosen legal retaliation in place of conversation." I didn't blink. Then came the phrases I expected. She's always been the responsible one. She's never struggled financially. We assumed it was shared, not owed. My mother chimed in, dabbing her eye with a monogrammed tissue. "She's so independent. We didn't think she needed credit for everything. It would have made Carter feel small." Lorna let them talk. She let it build, and then she opened the red folder. "Let's go over the timeline," she said. Her voice had the crispness of a paper cut. Sutton Halley covered her parents' consolidated medical debt in 2017. $42,000 verified wire transfer. Click. A receipt projected on the screen. She then paid the down payment on the Bramblewood property in 2018. $74,000 personal check. Click. Check image. In 2020, she co-signed a business loan for her brother. $26,500 remains unpaid. Click. Statement. And finally, she funded the catering venue deposit and security for the recent private event celebrating Carter Halley's 26th birthday. My father shifted in his seat. Total $164,000 from Sutton Halley's private funds. The room went completely still. I reached for my water glass and took a slow sip. Not for drama. Just to stay grounded. "Now," Lorna continued, "here are the communications associated with those transactions." She read aloud from the printed texts and emails. "Just one more favor, sweetheart. You're the only one with a clean record. This is for the family, not for show. You'll get the tax write-off." Each message landed like a pebble dropped into still water, rippling out shame. Then came the final piece, an audio clip. From last year's holiday dinner. My father's voice half laughing. "She never wants the spotlight anyway. Sutton's like the foundation. You don't see it, but it holds everything up." My mother replied, "And foundations don't get their names on plaques." The audio ended. No one spoke. Even the opposing lawyer leaned back, lips pressed thin. I looked at my parents, both still staring at the table like the wood grain might offer some escape. "You didn't forget," I said softly. "You erased." The mediator cleared her throat. "It's clear restitution is due. We can enter formal negotiations or we can escalate to a civil trial." "Ms. Halley, do you have a preference?" I looked at Lorna, then back at my parents. "Let's keep it on paper," I said, "where things don't get rewritten so easily." We adjourned, 20 minutes later. As I packed my folder, my mother passed by me and paused, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're not the person I raised." I looked at her steady. "No, I'm the one who raised myself after you were done." She walked away, and I walked out with my name intact and finally fully mine. 3 months later, the old furniture showroom on Calvert Street had a new sign out front, the Halley Center for Financial Clarity, a name chosen not out of ego, but reclamation. If they'd taught me anything, it was that money wasn't just numbers, it was narrative, and I was ready to rewrite mine. The building smelled faintly of fresh paint and cedar. Volunteers had helped strip the floors, hang the fixtures, even stitch the hand-sewn banner that now fluttered from the entryway. We weren't sleek or shiny, but we were open. That Saturday, I hosted our first community gathering, not a ribbon cutting or press event, just people. People like Marcy, who'd once co-signed on her grandson's car and ended up $18,000 in debt. Or Thomas, who admitted his daughter used his name to secure 2 credit cards before vanishing to another state. Their stories weren't rare, just rarely believed. I walked the room slowly, coffee in hand, answering questions, introducing folks. A woman in her 60s pulled me aside near the donation box. "You're Sutton Halley?" she said, cautious but kind. "I am. I read about the birthday party." She looked down for a second, then smiled. "It was brave what you did." I gave a small nod. I'd learned to accept that word brave even when it made me uncomfortable. Bravery wasn't always a roar. Sometimes it was a simple no after years of saying sure. By noon, the center was buzzing. A young woman led a budgeting workshop in the back room. Laughter floated up from the hallway where kids colored My Money Goals worksheets. We weren't solving everything, but we were making it harder for people to be quietly taken advantage of. Later that afternoon, as I sorted snacks in the break room, I checked my phone and saw a message from an unfamiliar area code. It was a photo of a front porch, one I recognized, my parents'. The camera angle was soft, almost shy, and in the center sat a plain white envelope with my name in careful script. Attached was the message. I didn't know how to say it out loud. I still don't agree, but I understand. Mom. I stared at it for a long moment. Not joy, not sorrow, something quieter, like the ache of something healing where the break used to be. I didn't respond, not right away. Some silences didn't need filling, some gaps weren't meant to be bridged, only acknowledged. As I stepped back out into the main room, Kendra waved me over. She'd become one of our first mentors, helping other women navigate shared accounts and subtle coercion. Her eyes lit up when she saw me. "We just got approved for next quarter's grant," she said. "Looks like this place is sticking around." "Good," I said, smiling. "It should." The late afternoon sun cast gold across the windows. People lingered, chatted, exchanged numbers, strangers building new kinds of families, not bound by obligation, but by care, consent, and clarity. Someone handed me a mug that said, "Not the bank," and I laughed out loud. Not the bank, not the fixer, not the secret name behind someone else's party. Just me. And that finally was enough. The kettle clicked off with a soft hiss, and I poured the hot water over 2 bags of chamomile before setting one mug down across from mine. No guests were coming tonight, but I always made 2. Old habits from years of waiting for someone to notice I'd done something kind, something thoughtful, something necessary. I walked through my apartment slowly barefoot the way I liked. The windows were open, letting in the early spring air. My place wasn't much modest, clean, warm, but every inch of it belonged to me. Not co-signed, not borrowed, not inherited. Me. On the hallway wall, right above the coat rack, hung a collage of mismatched photo frames. None of them showed me as a child at family gatherings. None of them showed Carter blowing out candles or my parents holding up happy retirement signs. Instead, they held the faces of women I'd mentored since the center opened. There was Kendra, arms around her daughter, both grinning on the steps of a small claims court holding paperwork that finally cleared her name. Next to her, Irene, 67, and finally debt-free, standing in front of her mobile flower cart like she'd just launched a rocket. And there was Jordan, not yet 20, who once whispered in our budgeting class, "I didn't even know it wasn't normal what he did with my checks." Each one reminded me, quiet people aren't weak, they're often just waiting for the right place to speak. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Lorna. "Kendra's segment just aired. CNN, they got her story right, and she credited you." I smiled but didn't reply. I wouldn't be doing interviews. That was never the point. Later, while folding laundry, I called Charlotte, an old friend from grad school who'd watched this whole saga unfold from the sidelines, never pushing, just checking in. "You'd be proud," I said, leaning on the kitchen counter. "Always am," she replied. "You built all this from nothing." "Not from nothing," I corrected gently. "From being invisible." "There's a difference." She was quiet a moment, then asked, "Do they still call?" My hand lingered on a dish towel. "No, not since the hearing. But Mom sent one more card last week, no apology. Just a photo of tulips blooming outside the old porch. No note." "That's something." "Maybe." I moved to the window and looked down at the city, the sidewalks filled with people who all carried invisible weight. Debt. Silence. Love that asked too much. "I used to think I was the foundation," I said after a moment. "The silent one. The support beam. The one who doesn't ask to be seen," and now she asked. Now? I looked back at the hallway, the photos, the paperwork neatly filed on my desk, the mentoring calendar for the next quarter already filling with names I didn't know yet. Now I build things, I said simply, things that don't collapse when people forget you exist. Charlotte didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Some people measure success by applause or legacy. Me, I measured it in solidity, in structures that stood whether or not anyone clapped. I turned the porch light on, not waiting, just welcoming. The kettle clicked again. I poured the second mug anyway.